Hello everyone, I'm back. Hi. So I took a little break from YouTube because I was coming to the end of my placement working in intensive care, where I was working as a trainee clinical psychologist. And, I knew about 2 months away from ending that I was going to need some time, so just some time to let the dust settle, to unpack, make sense of everything, because this placement has been a big one, and many of the reasons you'll be able to imagine, because intensive care it's pretty high stakes, let's say. But I think on a personal level, prior to starting this placement, I'd really had little to no experience of sickness and death, mostly because my parents are immigrants and all of my family live in an entirely different hemisphere. So when things are kind of going wrong, I just was never exposed to it really, and you kind of hear things secondhand, and people call you and give you bad news and stuff, but you're never there for it. You never see it. You're never kind of in the thick of it. So this really was like a baptism of fire, kind of just seeing how loss and grief and life-changing physical illnesses, how that kind of plays out in people's lives. And I really just wanted to take some time to properly consider all of those things. I think with every single placement that you go on as a trainee, you do think a lot about what you're going to take forward and how it's going to impact your practice. This placement has absolutely done that, but I think even more, it's really made me think about kind of life and death in general. So it's been incredibly formative and also incredibly difficult in the same breath. And I think with those kind of experiences, I don't know, at least for me, I wanted to make this video, I don't know if this closure is the right word, but as a proper ending and as a proper goodbye to the experience, so then I can move forward. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my lessons learned. Let's start with one that isn't too drastic, and that's the fact that most things really don't matter. Okay, so I really wanted to be clear that what I'm not saying is that people aren't allowed to experience, any negative emotion unless they are in a life or death situation, or you don't deserve to be unhappy because other people have it so much worse than you. That's not what I'm saying at all. Those are total fallacies and real unhealthy ways of thinking. However, I think going into ICU has been a real exercise in helping me recalibrate my emotional responses to things, if you like, so they are more in line with how much things actually matter. So I think it's really made me realize that most things in my life, because I'm going through a particularly kind of stable and secure period of my life, most things that happen to me on a daily basis, they don't matter. They will have absolutely no bearing on my life whatsoever. If we do a little analysis of what is difficult for me right now, I would say, number one, I'm doing a doctorate, hard. And number two, I live very far away from my family and my partner, also hard. But I think when that's kind of all you have, that occupies your most extreme position. So when it's this is the very best and that's the very worst. And so I think sometimes I would respond to those things as if they were catastrophic and have very strong reactions. And then I think you go into somewhere in ICU when things really are catastrophic, you get a new extreme position. And so all of your experiences start to kind of move more towards the middle of just how good and how bad things can get. And so I started to realize that my responses to things I kind of, even more unconsciously, they've just kind of dampened down a little bit. It's been actually quite wonderful in terms of my outlook and my relationship to the doctorate and elements of that. I'm a person who can get very wound up over small details, and I remember I was actually in ICU when I had to do this. I had to send this really, really awkward email to this psychologist, and that's the sort of thing that I would usually absolutely agonize over, and I would spend hours trying to think of the perfect wording, all of those things. I had to go and see someone who was genuinely incredibly unwell, obviously. I wrote it out, 30 seconds, sent it, moved on with my day. And it's just what breath of fresh air, and also or character development. And I can just feel it in other elements. Now I'm doing a written report, and that's something that I'd get stressed about and I think about, you know, at night, and like be working at unsociable hours. And just for this one, like I feel stressed, I feel frustrated at points, but does it keep me up at night? Absolutely not. Because I think it is that sense of, if this is the hardest thing that I have to do today, not only am I very lucky, but I am confident in my ability to do it. So let's not make this more painful than it needs to be. Because I think working in ICU, I've seen some situations which I would really question my own ability to get through and to manage. But when I look at my life situation at the moment, I'm like, I can actually handle all of this. Your body is your vessel. Working in ICU, you are naturally around people who are very physically unwell. By definition, if you're there, you need support for one or more of your organs functioning. And that experience has given me like a whole new, not even just like appreciation, like just like an awareness of my body and all the things that it does. Because I'm a person who has been sort of graced with incredibly good physical health, you know, for the time that I've been on this planet, as have my parents for the most part. And I think when that happens, you take yourself completely for granted. And I've actually like started to think about times where I've really mistreated my body, like not had respect for it, not cared for it properly. And, you know, times in my life where I have distilled its value to what it looks like, which seems, you know, wild to me now to be kind of focused on something so superficial, when actually everything that I love doing in my life, you know, walking, exercising, dancing, hugging, holding my baby niece, like all of those things are facilitated by my body functioning as it does right now. And I just remember, so I had one day in ICU which was really hard, and without, you know, going into detail, but I was working with someone who had a very, very extreme kind of physical illness, and it was so incredibly shocking to me. I think also because they were a young person, so you really identify with that, and it really, it took my breath away, as you can probably tell. And I remember getting home and I was feeling really like emotional. This is going to make me sound absolutely bonkers, by the way, so just bear with me. But I got out of the shower and I was like getting ready for bed, and I like started putting this like cream on myself, and it was just like this moment of just like really connecting with my body. And I just like, I felt so thankful, and I was just like putting this cream on my arm, just like thinking like, you know, thank you, because, you know, in many ways our body is all we have. Like, that is the thing that accompanies us from conception to death. And I think it's just really made me connect with this idea of self-care so much more, like genuinely on like quite a spiritual level almost, of just like, you know, thank you for looking after me and getting me through everything that you have up until this point, and I'm going to take better care of you from here on out, really. And it's just that sense of, so my supervisor encouraged me kind of as I got settled into the placement to kind of think about what would it be like, you know, from your personal perspective, if you had one of these physical conditions and something life-changing happened to you. And I was really, I don't know, I think it's fair to say I felt a bit ashamed of the fact that like at first I was really overwhelmed by this feeling of like total hopelessness and despair. And it's like, how can you feel like that when you also like don't have any gratitude for like what your body does for you at all? But suddenly this idea of it being taken away from you is so shocking. But also the fact that so many people have long-term health conditions or physical disabilities, and actually I think I feel shame with it, because like as a psychologist, I feel like it's my responsibility to be able to connect with everyone's feelings all the time. And actually this is probably a group where I haven't massively taken the effort to put myself in their shoes. And actually these people are living their lives and kind of promoting their own quality of life as best they can. And I'd never really thought about it at all. And And it's just kind of, I suppose, like moving forward, it's making me think a lot more about kind of able-bodiedness and just how our world is really set up for people who are physically and psychologically well, and just how excluding that is for people who are already struggling with their own kind of internal physical difficulties as well. Life has its own plans for you. When I first started in ICU, I took this idea way too far because, you know, in fairness to me, ICU was all I was doing at the time because I obviously couldn't go and see other people or do other things. And so you kind of get trapped in this vacuum of like disaster, where the worst things you could possibly imagine are happening all at the same time and everything feels completely random. And so I was very much left with the sense of like, you know, you can't control anything, expect the unexpected, all plans are completely futile, which I have just, you know, walked myself back from that brink, having a bit of time away from it. And I think like one of the things I'm taking from it is just that it's important to hold on to plans lightly, because I think I'm a person who enjoys a plan and I can be very rigid about those things as well. And previously, I think I have fallen into the trap because I hold on to my plan so tightly. When things go wrong, don't go to plan, or when things come up outside of my control, which means that I have to pivot or change in some way, I've taken it really hard and I've struggled to adapt. And I think it's that thing. It's like plans are lovely. It's so important to have like aspirations and goals, but it's also like having that bandwidth where things can change and to allow yourself to respond to those things flexibly and hopefully not be so like crushed by them in the process. And I think, I don't know if this is going to be a helpful thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. But for many of the people going into ICU, my sense was loads of them, there wasn't this warning sign that that's where they were going to end up on that given day. They started their day pretty normally and then they were in ICU. So I think it's also made me think a lot about delayed gratification and sacrifice that people make all the time in their day-to-day life because of some higher goal or some bigger plan that they have. And I think those things are important. You know, I'm not advocating like a completely like carpe diem life because, you know, nothing would get done if we all did that. But I think it's more the sense of like, it's really important to enjoy what you are doing right now. And I think there have been points in my life, you know, particularly with work, where it's like, I'm happy to work all the time because I want to achieve X thing, and I will do that at the expense of like living my life. And it's funny because like I've always like considered myself as like a very ambitious and career-driven person, and I really feel that like melting away in some respects having worked in ICU, because I don't know, it's like that stuff is important, but I don't want to do it at the expense of like really enjoying life and enjoying where I am right now. Like I don't want to be in a situation because of like, oh, I want to get to this point in my life in 5 years' time that I'm working all hours of the day and, you know, not meeting my friends for dinner or going to classes that I would really enjoy and cultivating other aspects of my life. Like that's just doesn't feel quite so important to me anymore. And I think, I mean, it's, I don't know, I guess all of these things that I'm saying are just like much better summarized by like all these cliches of like, life is too short, enjoy the journey, it's not just about the destination. But like it really, they're all really true. Death isn't as scary as it seems. Going back to kind of my own relationship with death, so it's always been something that's like really scared me, and I think that's also a symptom of being young, because just don't want the ride to end really. But I think interestingly, the sort of ending that scared me the most was one where I'd get ill or I'd have an accident, or anyway, just ending up in hospital where there's all these doctors and medics around and I'm kind of hooked up to machines and all of those things. Like that for me felt like the scariest thing ever, which is like very interesting that I ended up in ICU. And I think just like, in reality, it was so different to what I had in my mind. Like, just ICU generally, I thought it was going to be this super chaotic environment where like everyone's like pages are going off and there's like alarms. Like, I watch a lot of medical dramas. Like, I just thought it would just be like chaos and busyness all the time, and people would be like really unwell and just stressed and in pain, like all these things. And like, actually, when you walk around, I don't know, it did land. Like, I did really kind of take in just like how peaceful everyone kind of looked, and comfortable and looked after. And I think that was the thing that was scary to me, just this idea of like, if you know, when the end comes, if you were that environment, that you'd be really scared and everything would be really confusing and chaotic. And not to say that that doesn't happen, but I suppose just like the view of it that I had was just, you know, everyone's really looked after. And I don't know, the doctors and nurses, like the medical team, were just like unbelievable in the care that they provide. And I think I was just really kind of took my breath away a little bit again, of just like humane the process was, because I think maybe that was another concern of just like these hospital environments being so impersonal and clinical. But actually just like, you know, the staff will see this all the time, and yet it really felt like they responded to each one as an individual and kind of honoured it and gave it the significance that it merited every single time, which I thought was such like a beautiful thing. And just like, I don't know if it was like particularly with COVID, but the doctors became, it just seemed like they had a very good sense of like when the end was coming. And so there was a lot of focus on making people comfortable and making sure that family members were around them. Oh my God, I'm getting upset. Oh my God. Oh my God, I said I wouldn't do this. Let me get it out. Whew. So I actually can't afford to get upset and have it immortalised on film because I'm a really ugly crier. So I'm just going to say this really quickly so I don't cry. But I just think this idea of like, you're being so looked after by this team and having like your family there. And it was actually like a very peaceful and beautiful moment, and just being surrounded by people who love you and just like want to make sure that you go on to the next chapter as safely as possible. I just thought it was very beautiful. Oh my God. Whew, getting through that one. And I think what's also interesting for me, like I've never attended like a funeral and things before, or like when people have died, it's always kind of like been through external communications or like it happening to other people and things. And I think like my first thought, as it would be, I don't know if this is a stupid thing to say, but like my thoughts have always been occupied by the person who's died and just being like, God, the tragedy, and it's so upsetting, and just like feeling so terrible for them. When I think like in some ways like that's shifted a bit, in the sense of like, I guess when people die, I do really feel comforted by this sense of like they are at peace. And actually the thing that's really heartbreaking for me about death is really like the people who are left behind. And where I worked, there was like this chaplaincy service, so like people who had religious needs could kind of get support and insights and things that they needed. And I kind of spoke with some people who were involved in that, and so one of the quotes that was shared with me was this sense of life has not ended but changed. And I think that's kind of what's given me comfort and made me feel less scared about the whole death situation, because people who die are just so alive in people's memories and how they are spoken about. And I think it was really kind of a lesson of like, that bond continues always. There is always light in darkness. I think this like relates a bit to my previous point, which I suppose together just makes me feel a bit less scared about things going horrendously wrong, although I hope they don't. I guess it's that sense of like having many conversations with people who are about to lose someone or who have just lost someone. I think when you imagine what those conversations are going to be like, and like I said, hadn't had much experience of being kind of in that particular role, when you imagine what it's going to be like, you just think it's going to be so much despair, so much heartbreak. It's just going to be bleak. The outlook is going to be bleak. All like darkness everywhere. And it's not to say that those things weren't there, because they absolutely were. And for some people that took up way more of the picture than others. But I think I was really taken aback by just how often in these conversations we would both kind of like be laughing and they would be joking with me and they would be telling me like these really silly stories about their loved ones and all their eccentricities and quirks and things that made them completely individual. And it was just, I don't know, it's kind of amazing because I think we all have these situations in our head, and I think I've said this in this video, but like situations where you just think, if that happened to me, I wouldn't survive it. Like, I wouldn't want to continue living because it would be that horrendous. And I guess you just see in ICU that happening to people every single day, and they choose not to give up. And not only that, they are able to kind of preserve things that are good in all the tragedy, which is like pretty amazing. It makes you feel very kind of proud to be a human in a way. And, you know, there aren't that many opportunities for us to feel kind of proud to be part of our species, but this is definitely one of them. And I suppose, like, it's just very comforting to know that no matter, like, how dark things get, there is always the opportunity for light to break through. So, pulling all these things together, I mean, it's probably obvious that this had a really big impact on me. And like, you know, while I'm summarising some of the life lessons, this really is barely scratching the surface. And I just feel like the impact of ICU has bled out into so many areas of my life. And I really hope that I can hold on to some of this for as long as I can, because I definitely feel like I can approach life a little bit more boldly than I used to. And it's given me a lot of perspective on things so that I can let go of things that just like fundamentally aren't important, which is like, yeah, very handy on a personal level. And I think part of it is like in ICU, things are so fast paced and like you have this really intense, meaningful, well, at least for me, very meaningful like moment with someone, and then they leave or people pass away and you never get a chance to say like goodbye, which is very strange for a psychologist because we're always very like, you know, endings and like prepare, and like there's none of that in ICU. And I think in part this video is like a little bit of trying to hold on to some of that and to say goodbye to the experience and like the people that you didn't really get a chance to say goodbye to. So I hope this hasn't been too intense a watch or like brought up too many difficult themes for people, because I appreciate the topic of life and death is a pretty big one. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching and for bearing with me. I will let you go now. Enjoy your day, and I very much look forward to speaking with you next time. Ciao for now.